The text is in your bulletin. It's in the first section. It comes right across from your worship guide for today. It's Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me as the judge or referee between you and your brother?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Guard yourselves against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy." Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's why I'll store all my grain and goods. I'll say to myself, you have stored up plenty of goods, enough for several years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself." God said to him, "Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich towards God." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It reminds me of a verse from Colossians that Paul says, Colossians 3:2, "Think about the things above and not about things on earth." We live in a society, and this isn't even a stewardship message. Goodness gracious, I wasted this on you. That's called sarcasm. All right. We live in a society of plenty. We live in a society where really, if we took seriously the call to erase, not necessarily poverty, but to erase hunger, we really could do it if we chose to put our resources in that. The folly of living in bondage to material possessions and desires is to be transformed into a new life of spiritual freedom. The question is really, what is of lasting value in life? What lasts forever? Jesus, this story from the Gospel of Luke begins with somebody coming and saying, "Jesus, listen, my brother and I, my father died," and this has never happened in our society, that a family's fussing over stuff. Has that ever happened? I can't imagine that happening. And so this gentleman comes to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, tell my brother," goodness gracious, "tell my brother to give me what is mine." Wow, that's never happened before. You see, some inheritance issues in the time of Jesus, first century Judaism, they were covered by the Torah, and so oftentimes a rabbi was the one that would make many of those decisions. And so this gentleman is coming to Jesus because he is seen as a rabbi and seen where that is the safe say instant legal expert. Pastor of the gospel, oftentimes I find myself as the legal expert in family situations. Those are my favorite days when I get those calls. "My sister's done such and such. Don't you think you should call her and tell her?" Yeah, you better believe I do think that. And so it's always, you never know exactly how to jump into a situation, so the answer to that is never jump into a situation. Most of the times you allow the situation to work itself out, or sometimes there's going to be conflict and it's going to last for generations. We all know that too. And especially when it's centered around stuff. I can't tell you the number of folks that I have seen that have died and family members that haven't seen them for 20 years all of a sudden feel the need to come right after the funeral and see what has their name on it. The man asked Jesus to command his brother to divide the family inheritance with him. Jesus perceives that his motivation is prompted more by self-interest than it is a genuine inquiry into rabbinical law. And so Jesus says, "I tell you what, you sit here and let me tell you a story." That was the way Jesus dealt with everything. He said, "Let me tell you a story." And he gives them this parable of a rich fool. This guy has lots and lots of stuff, and he doesn't know what to do with this stuff, so he makes and tears down his certain places so he can store more stuff. Now, we like our stuff. Somebody say amen. We love our stuff. stuff as much as anybody's into stuff, and we have to be careful because many times the stuff ends up owning us and we don't end up owning the stuff. Are you with me? Because stuff is always stuff. So he tells this parable about this rich guy that dies. Now, a lot of times we'll take this to say, well, what this means is that all rich people are evil. That is not true, because everybody in here is rich. There's not a single person in our church today that is not rich and is not in some ways condemned by this. It doesn't matter what the bottom line is. We have more than enough roof over our head. Are you with me? Everybody needs to be with me. The basic necessity of life is a small roof. Everybody here has more than a small roof. Mostly everybody here has more than one car. Mostly everybody here has stuff in your refrigerator right now that is going to spoil before you eat it and you're going to throw it out, right? That's rich, and that's what Jesus is talking about. This gentleman, it's a control issue. The question is, who's in control? It's also a priority and a perspective issue. There's nothing wrong with careful management, because that is biblical. Careful financial and stuff management is biblical. The problem in the parable that Jesus tells, it doesn't say the man is wicked. It does not say that. It does not say that this guy is a horrible, horrible man. It's a control issue and perspective issue. That's what the issue that Jesus has with the rich fool is the title of the parable. Because there's no concern for anyone else but himself. To be rich towards God is to treasure God more than the stuff. And that is what Jesus is talking about. We are to treasure God more than everything else. C.S. Lewis says, aim at heaven and you'll get earth thrown in. I love this quote. Aim at earth and you get neither. You hear that? That'll preach if you're like somebody else decent. Beware. Okay, hear this statement. I know I gotta hurry because we gotta have communion. Beware and be aware of covetousness. Beware and be aware, because it can creep into our lives. He, like many of us, are a victim of the cancerous disease of egotism. He failed to realize that wealth always comes as a result of commonwealth. We've got to also take into the responsibility of our world. I had a banana this morning. It was not grown in the United States. I drank 2 cups of coffee this morning. One was South American, and I think one was South African. Are you with me? I put on clothes. This was made in China or somewhere in Taiwan. My shoes were not made in the United States, nor were my slacks. They were made in Bangladesh or somewhere. So somebody had to work to clothe me. Are you with me? We are in an international time in history where everything is global. And at McDonald's, the egg, I doubt it came from Hartwell, but it came from somewhere probably in the southeastern United States. Or it may have been fake and came from Russia. I don't know. The bread was produced locally with wheat that probably came from here. A lot of times when you buy dishes that have shrimp in it, are you with me? The shrimp that are in the dishes do not come from the United States. They often come from Taiwan and Thailand. You know why? Because those shrimp are cheaper. Are you with me? We live in a global world. And everything we have is because of someone else and what they have done to make it possible. And we've got to remember that we are a part of that and share the responsibility in all of that. I love this quote from MLK, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of our reality. The rich man tragically failed to realize this. He thought that he could live and grow in his own little self-centered world. He was an individualist gone wild. Indeed, he was an eternal fool, Jesus says. It's about priority and perspective. I want to close with this short parable, and then we'll have communion. Y'all are going to be late for breakfast, sorry. But I got to tell it, it's a good one. And this is a parable that was written by Chaya Sarah Sandberg. There was a community not long ago that had a high clock mounted up on a high hill in town, on one of the tallest buildings. If you turn to back your booklet, you'll see the picture of the Callaway clock in LaGrange, Georgia. And I just thought that kind of fit this parable. As people would go about their business throughout the day, they would periodically glance up, but it was so tall they had to kind of wrench their neck to see the clock. And so they would glance up at the clock, and if there was a difference in the time on their watches and the time on the clock, inevitably, always, they would change their watch to the clock that was on the tower. But over a period of time, people just got kind of tired of this. In fact, it became a pain in the neck, so to speak. And so they had a county meeting, and then they had a city council meeting, and they decided that what the best thing to do was let's move the clock lower to the ground so that if there was a problem with the clock, then we could fix it. And we would always know we got the right time. And so the city council met, they made the decision, and they took the clock and they took it off the tower and they put it back at the ground level. So you didn't have to wrench your neck to see the clock anymore. Well, as time went by, they began to check the clock, and when the clock was wrong and different from what time was on their watch, because the clock was accessible, they started changing the clock rather than the watch. And so over a period of time, they started to do this periodically and again and again. And so guess what happens? The clock malfunctioned. And since it was so easy because it was low and they could get to it, they started repairing the clock, and they repaired the clock, and they repaired the clock. And guess what? The clock became at one point in time unrepairable. So they had a city council meeting. They gathered all together. They said, what are we going to do about the clock? And they realized that since the clock would have been very expensive to fix, the clock had become irrelevant. So the big massive clock ended up in the trash heap. What is it worth to put God first? Let us pray.